All right, next lesson here, lesson 103. They got a lot of topics in here. They kind of meander around a little bit, but I want to specifically talk about the National Electrical Code and just briefly how to use that book, and then I will throw in here some metric conversion information towards the end too. But all right, first of all, National Electrical Code, otherwise known as the NEC. It's kind of a must that you become very familiar with this book during your study here in these 4 years. So this is what our NEC looks like currently. Current version we're using is the 2017 for this school year. They print a new version every 3 years, so you can do your math and you can tell we're due for another one in 2020. So this will actually be the last year we're using this 2017 book. It's published by the National Fire Protection Association, otherwise called the NFPA. Okay, and this is actually known as NFPA 70. So, NFPA 70. And as we look through these page numbers, you're going to see every page number it starts with 70 dash and then whatever the page. That's why you see that. This is basically because it's a part of a sort of a larger volume, right? So essentially for our purposes, you can ignore that 70 when it comes to page numbers. Kind of I don't know if it's a fun fact or what, but the first one was actually published in 1897, and I did look it up. It was only 58 pages. Okay, I think now we're without looking in 6 or 7 or 800 pages. Obviously, it's grown substantially since then. But I actually found a link here that you can find an electronic version of the first NEC code book, and I'll put that in the course page as well. You guys can check out for yourselves. I found it pretty interesting. But anyway, so arrangement. How is this book made up? Okay, the code book, as you might guess, is very sort of predictable and systematic in how it does things. So we have essentially here you can see 9 chapters plus a informative annex. Okay, so chapter 1 is just some general stuff. Something very important that gets overlooked a lot in chapter 1 is and I should say every chapter is split up into articles. But Article 100 in Chapter 1 is actually definitions. You're going to define some common terms. That gets overlooked quite a bit. You can find a lot of code answers by looking in Article 100, definitions. But anyway, Chapter 1 is some general info. Chapter 2 covers wiring and protection. Okay. Chapter 3 then covers wiring methods. Chapter 4 is equipment for general use. So I'll give you some examples. Wiring and protection. There's going to be some codes in there for overcurrent protection, for grounding and bonding, for services, for branch circuits. So just overall, wiring method. Well, I shouldn't even say that. Wiring scenarios. Chapter 3 is going to be your wiring methods and materials. So this is where you're going to find specific information about maybe the wiring method you're using. So EMT, MC cable, Romex cable. That's where you're going to find that kind of stuff. And then Chapter 4, equipment for general use. So now we're talking about transformers, luminaires, otherwise known as light fixtures, transformers, motors. So kind of equipment, right? And then that's your general stuff, for lack of a better term. So they tell you this applies generally to all electrical installs. Okay, so that's kind of the general meat and potatoes of it all here. But then we get into a little more specific here with our chapters 5, 6, and 7. So chapter 5 is special occupancies, chapter 6 is special equipment, and then chapter 7 is special conditions. So really briefly, what are we talking about? We might have hazardous locations, right? We might have, there's actually a section on houseboats in here, right? You get a lot more specific, all right? You're going to spend most of your time here in this first section. But then, as they say here, this second section supplements chapters 1 through 7, right? So maybe we're wiring a houseboat, and we can look here and find out generally how we have to do that. But then we can look here to find out specifically how we're going to do that. Or, something more realistic in our area is what they call solar photovoltaic systems or solar electric systems. You're going to find a specific chapter or a specific article in chapter 6 for that. So generally we can use these methods, but we also have to abide by whatever it says in chapter 6 regarding, in this case, solar photovoltaics, right? So this adds to or supplements the stuff in this section. Then we get into chapter 8, which frankly, my career didn't do much with communication systems. If yours does, you'll spend a lot more time there. That's actually kind of very specific, as you can imagine. Chapter 9, we will actually spend a lot of time in chapter 9. That's where we have some special and specific tables that we're going to use to reference various information. So we'll spend plenty of time in there throughout the year. And then informative annex, we'll touch on that a little bit. That's, again, some special information, special situations. But again, generally, chapters 1 through 4 apply to general use scenarios. Chapter 5, 6, 7 are more specific conditions or equipment, right? And then, as I said, each chapter is split up into individual articles. So, for instance, chapter 2 is made up by article 210, 230, 250, so on and so forth. So everything that starts with a 2 is in chapter 2. Chapter 3 then is made up by, 310, 320, things like that. Anything that starts with a 3 is in chapter 3. Okay, makes sense, and that pattern carries out throughout the NEC. All right, so navigation, how are you going to find your way around this thing? There's 2 basic methods. These probably won't be a surprise. We have a table of contents, okay? It's in the front of the book. Again, hopefully no surprise there. This is going to give you a broader overview of the content in each chapter, okay? So you can see here we have, as I said, chapter 1, okay? We have article 100, which is definitions, and we have article 110, which is requirements. Get down here to chapter 2, we have 200, 210, 215, 220, so on and so forth. And you can see it just kind of gives us a broad overview. In this case, grounding and bonding, okay, 250 down here, very common article. We'll spend a lot of time there. That doesn't really narrow it down very well, right? So you got to get used to, what are we looking for? How are we looking for it? I like to use the table of contents, if we know there's an article for it. So for instance, let's get down here and find, let's pick one. Let's say metal clad cable type MC. I know that there is an article for MC cable. Rather than go to the index, which is going to be cluttered with more info, I'll go to the table of contents. There's less to sift through to find what I'm looking for. Then once I find that article, I'll page through and find what I need, okay? Let's look at the other side of that. The index now is going to be more specific, okay? It's in the back of the book. The downside here is there's a lot more information to sift through, but we can find that more specific information. So, if I know I'm looking for, let's pick one here, AC, DC, general use snap switches, I can probably think, there's probably not an article specific to that. But let's find everywhere that's mentioned in this book, and then I'll come back here, find AC general use snap switches. Now the benefit is it's going to turn me right to that specific exact code article, so I don't have to do any further looking once I get there. So it's again, table of contents is maybe a little quicker but less specific. Index, you might spend a little more time looking for it, but it's more specific, and you'll sort of get your preference and learn which to use as you get more accustomed to using this NEC book, right? So referencing the code, we have to reference code articles quite a bit as an apprentice and as a working electrician. So I pulled a section out of the code here. It happens to be page 70-64 if you guys want to take a look at this for yourselves. But anyway, let's say I want to reference this particular piece here. Receptacle shall be installed such that no point measured horizontally along the floor line of any wall space is more than 1.8 meters or 6 feet from a receptacle outlet. That's actually a code you guys are going to be very familiar with by the time before we hit the midpoint of the year, let's say that. So anyway, I'm going to reference that, okay? I essentially say, how far apart can my receptacles be? And the answer is 6 feet. But as your instructor or as maybe an inspector, I'm going to say, yeah, well, prove it to me. How are you going to do that? You're going to have to reference the code. So how do we do that? We first need to start by referencing the article, which should be 210, okay, and follow the red arrow up here. But then each article is split into further subsections referenced by a dot and then some set of numbers. So in this case, .52. So we start with 210.52. So you're always going to sort of backtrack your way. So here's what we need. So I'm just going to keep backtracking until I can find a number that begins with the article that I'm in, right? So 210.52. And then sort of the first thing to look for is sort of your next bold text. So in this case, it's A. Okay, they might have an A, they might have a B, a C, whatever the case, wherever we fall under, we need to then go down and reference, in this case, the A, and we're going to put it just like that in parentheses if we're actually writing this. We're going to have A, and then we're going to go down, they have it broken down again into numbers, right? So number 1, so we're going to do it just like that, 1 in parentheses. So this code reference is 210.52A1 if I'm going to sort of speak it. If we're going to write it, it's 210.52, A in parentheses, 1 in parentheses, right? So the other thing I want to mention here is the code uses a common numbering system. Okay, so let's actually look at 2 pages from 2 different articles. So we have Article 330, which is metal-clad cable. And then we have Article 334, which is non-metallic sheath cable. So these are just 2 different cable types. So naturally, there's going to be a lot of similarities, or we got to talk about the same types of things. And the reason I'm telling you this is the code's going to use the same numbering system everywhere it can to reference the same types of things. So let's look at here. 330.1 is the scope of the article. Well, guess what? Again, MC is 330, so NM is 334. So 330.1 is scope. 334.1 is scope. Okay, that's neat, right? Maybe a coincidence? No, it's certainly not. So let's go to definitions. Well, what do you know? That's actually .2. We get down here to listing requirements. That's .6. .10 is uses permitted. .12 is uses not permitted. And we could go through both of these articles and point these similarities out. But my point is, if you become somewhat familiar, for instance, a good one is your .10 and your .12. .10 is uses permitted. .12 is uses not permitted. Let's say you happen to remember a few key code articles. You know that type MC cable is Article 330 because it's a common material, or Article 334 is NM cable. Again, it's a common material. And I want to know, well, geez, am I allowed to use NM cable in this certain situation? Well, if you know that NM cable is Article 334 and you just happen to know that .10 is uses permitted, you've effectively memorized that code reference for you to look up. So get used to some of those common code article numbering sequences. And again, not every article will have a section for uses permitted, uses not permitted. Grounding and bonding certainly doesn't have a uses permitted and not permitted, but they're just going to skip that. So in other words, they don't use grounding and bonding as Article 250. Article 250.10 is probably just not used, right? They're not going to use .10 for something else. That is specifically kept for uses permitted. .12 is specifically kept for uses not permitted. And that's just 2 examples. But again, you'll see that common numbering 100% throughout the code book. No questions asked.